People laughed. The sound, sharp and dismissive, carried across the wide expanse of the tarmac as a beat-up, rust-dusted pickup truck rattled onto the pristine surface. Out of the driver's side, unfolding stiffly, stepped a man whose hands were stained with the permanent grime of engine grease, whose jeans had seen more repairs than a country road, and whose flannel shirt looked like it had survived a wrestling match with a badger. His name was Clayton. Clayton Rhee. He'd been called to fix a billionaire's private jet. A billionaire's jet. The idea itself was absurd to the polished crowd gathered behind the terminal glass. They were executives, engineers in crisp uniforms, ground crew in spotless jumpsuits. They scoffed, exchanged knowing glances, and resumed their hushed conversations, the low murmur of their mockery a constant hum in the air. No one expected him to touch the jet, certainly not to repair it. But behind the glass, one woman watched in silence. Delaney Carter, the jet's stunning owner. The heiress to an aviation empire, her face, usually a carefully composed mask of confidence and control, was unreadable. She didn't laugh. She didn't scoff. She simply observed. Within minutes, she would walk onto the runway, her presence stopping everything, and ask the one question that would echo far beyond the airport, a question that would shock the entire world. It was 6:47 a.m. The sky, still bruised and purple from the receding night, offered little warmth. A biting wind whipped across the tarmac, cutting through Clayton's worn-out flannel like a razor. His boots, scuffed and heavy, crunched against the asphalt with every step, the sound louder than the distant muted roar of engines preparing for takeoff. He had received the emergency call just before sunrise. Jet failure. Urgent. No details, no context. Only an address, Clearwater International Airport, and the promise of quick, substantial pay. He didn't ask questions. He just went. The private jet stood in the distance, a sleek silver beast, its polished surface reflecting the pre-dawn light. It was surrounded by a cluster of men in navy suits, their shoes gleaming, their designer coats offering no protection against the chill of Clayton's gaze. They glanced up briefly as he approached, their expressions a mixture of disdain and amusement. Then they returned to their laughter, one leaning over to another, whispering something that sent both into a fresh burst of chuckles. Clayton ignored them. He'd seen their type before. Boardroom brilliance with zero understanding of how things actually worked. What mattered was the aircraft. A jet failure wasn't just a technical issue. Lives were on the line. He dropped his heavy tool bag beside the jet, the clatter of metal on metal a stark contrast to the hushed tones of the men in suits. He reached for the engine panel, his fingers, thick and calloused, finding the latch with practiced ease. He opened it and froze. What he saw nearly made his breath hitch. It wasn't just a minor malfunction. The fuel line was cracked. Not just cracked, but melted. The insulation, vital for preventing sparks, was gone. The clamp, meant to secure, the line was corroded, crumbling at his touch. And the fuel leak? It was dangerously, terrifyingly close to the ignition coil. One spark, one tiny, misplaced electrical charge, and this jet would have exploded mid-air. Whoever had touched this last should have been banned from aviation forever. Negligence this severe was criminal. Clayton knew with a sickening certainty that he had minutes, not hours, not even an hour, minutes, with no backup, no assistant, and no time to explain the gravity of the situation to the suits who clearly wouldn't understand. He rolled up his sleeves. His fingers, stained and rough, moved with the certainty of years, spent fixing engines in barns on highways under the scorching sun of Carolina summers, in the freezing rain of late nights. He wasn't a technician with a degree. He was a mechanic with instinct. The airport staff, the ground crew, the engineers who had been baffled by the problem, they all gawked. A few pulled out their phones, recording videos, likely planning to share the spectacle of the dirty mechanic attempting to fix a billionaire's jet. He could feel their judgment like heat on his back, a tangible wave of skepticism and amusement, but he didn't stop. He couldn't afford to. Inside the terminal, Delaney Carter watched everything. She said nothing as her staff snickered. Their hushed comments about the hillbilly mechanic and the CEO's bad luck filling the air. She wasn't just a CEO. She was aviation royalty. Her father had built Carter Skytech from scratch, a legacy of innovation and precision. And she had turned it into an empire, expanding its reach across continents. She knew jets. She had flown them, built them, even raced them in her younger days. And what she saw outside stunned her. She leaned forward, pressing her forehead against the cool glass, squinting through the morning light. Who was this man? This man with the oil-slicked hands and torn jeans who seemed to move with the grace of a surgeon, his every movement deliberate and precise. Why was he the only one who saw what her highly trained, highly paid pilots and engineers had missed? Then the jet's lights flickered. A soft, almost imperceptible hum pulsed through the machine, growing steadier, stronger. It was alive again. Her breath caught in her throat. She stood up slowly, her eyes still locked on the man outside. Everyone else saw a mechanic, a joke, a temporary, desperate measure. She saw something else entirely. A quiet competence. And understanding that went beyond textbooks and digital readouts. And in less than 3 minutes she would walk down that runway and change both their lives forever. The moment the jet roared back to life, the sound cutting through the morning air, like a triumphant cry, the laughter stopped. The executives behind the glass stared in stunned silence, their smug grins evaporating as the humming grew steadier, more powerful. One of them whispered, his voice filled with disbelief. That should have taken hours. But Clayton had already closed the engine panel. He didn't celebrate. He didn't gloat. He simply wiped his hands on an old rag, the movement economical and practiced, slung his tool bag over his shoulder, and turned to walk away. His job was done. That was when the private jet's door opened. The steps lowered slowly, each click of the mechanism echoing like thunder across the silent tarmac. A pair of heels touched the metal steps, sleek, black, and undeniably commanding. Delaney Carter descended with the effortless elegance of someone born into power, each step a deliberate statement. But there was something different in her eyes. This wasn't the cool, calculating gaze of a woman used to getting what she wanted through wealth and influence. This was curiosity, sharp, intentional, unshakable. Clayton stopped mid-step when he saw her coming toward him. She was dressed in a tailored navy suit with gold buttons, her hair pulled back in a severe professional bun, her stride confident and purposeful. Every step she took made the suited men behind her shift uncomfortably, their earlier amusement replaced by a sudden nervous tension. She walked right past them, past the silent engineers, past the staff who had been laughing just minutes ago. She walked straight up to the man covered in engine grease, and the world seemed to hold its breath. "You fixed it," she said quietly, her voice cutting through the silence. Clayton blinked, a flicker of surprise in his eyes. "Yes, ma'am." "No," she corrected, her voice firm but not unkind. "You saved it. My pilot told me the engine was compromised beyond repair. He said we would need to ground it for a week. He missed a melted fuel line. It was nearly touching the ignition coil." Clayton simply nodded, calmly brushing dust off his shirt. "You could have walked away," she continued, "left it for someone else, reported the hazard and let them deal with it." "I don't walk away from fire hazards," Clayton said simply. A beat of silence stretched between them. Then, Delaney smiled. Not the kind of strained, polite smile worn in boardrooms for the benefit of investors, but one that came from somewhere real, somewhere deep within her. It was small, honest, and it startled everyone watching, including Clayton. "Do you know who I am?" she asked, the question almost a whisper. "Yes," he replied, his voice steady. "Delaney Carter, Carter Skytech." "You don't seem impressed." "I'm not here to be impressed," Clayton said, meeting her gaze directly. "I'm here to fix problems." Delaney studied him for a moment, a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes. Then she turned to her staff, her voice ringing with authority. "Everyone inside now." No one dared object. The terminal doors clicked shut behind them, sealing, Them off from the gawking crowd, from the whispers and the judgment. Now it was just the two of them on the vast, empty tarmac. "I've spent my entire life surrounded by men who talk big and do little," she said, her voice softer now, the corporate mask finally beginning to slip. "Men who promise the world but can't even see what's in front of them. You're the first one who did the opposite." Clayton gave a small nod, acknowledging her words but not dwelling on them. "I was just doing my job." Delaney took a deep breath, as if making a decision that would alter the course of her carefully planned life. She looked at the sky, the sun finally beginning to break through the clouds, then back at the man who had saved her jet, and quite possibly, her life. She took a step closer, the distance between them shrinking. "What would you do?" she asked, slowly, her voice barely a whisper. "If someone like me asked you something completely insane?" Clayton didn't move. His gaze remained steady, unwavering. Delaney stepped forward, her heels clicking on the concrete like a metronome counting down to something inevitable. "I have been proposed to 23 times, I counted, by men in suits who memorized my net worth and called it love. Men who saw a walking, talking balance sheet." She paused, her voice catching slightly. "But you," she continued, her gaze unwavering, "you walked into this nightmare with a wrench, saved my jet, risked your life to prevent a disaster, and asked for nothing in return. You didn't see the price tag. You saw the problem." "I didn't do it for you," Clayton said, his voice level. "I did it because someone had to. It was a fire hazard." "Exactly," she whispered, the single word loaded with meaning. "That's what makes it real." He looked down, suddenly acutely aware of the dirt on his hands, the fraying collar of his shirt, the grease stains on his jeans. The stark contrast between his appearance and hers, between his world and hers, was undeniable. "You want to marry a mechanic?" "No," she said, her voice firm. "I want to marry the only man here who didn't try to impress me. The only man who saw a problem and fixed it, without fanfare, without expectation." Behind them, the lights from the terminal glowed in, the evening dusk, casting long shadows across the tarmac. A few curious eyes peeked through the glass, whispers spreading like wildfire through the building. Phones were likely filming, capturing the bizarre scene unfolding before them, but Delaney didn't care. For the first time in years, she wasn't performing. She wasn't playing a role. She was simply being. Clayton finally broke the silence again, his voice low. "You're serious?" As a heart attack. He studied her for a long moment, his gaze moving over her face, searching for any hint of insincerity, of a hidden agenda. He wasn't looking at the clothes, the title, the billions. He was looking at the person. Then a small smile touched his lips, a genuine, unpracticed smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "Then take off your heels." Delaney blinked, momentarily taken back. "What?" "If you're serious," he repeated, his voice gentle but firm, "take off your shoes, come walk with me. 5 minutes. No titles, no headlines, just two people on the same ground." She hesitated only a second. Then, with a fluid movement, she leaned on one foot, kicked off one sleek black heel, then the other. They landed on the concrete with soft thuds, symbols of her world discarded. Barefoot on the cool, hard tarmac, Delaney Carter, the billionaire CEO, followed a mechanic into the deepening twilight. They walked past the gleaming jet, past the shadows of silent staff still watching from the terminal. She didn't ask where. They were going. She only matched his pace, step for step, the concrete rough beneath her bare feet. It was a strange, liberating sensation. Clayton led her to the edge of the airfield, where old hangars stood like forgotten giants, their corrugated, metal walls catching the last rays of the setting sun. He pulled open a rusted door, the metal groaning in protest, and gestured for her to enter. Inside was not what she expected. There were no machines, no engines in pieces, just a small folding table, a battered chair, and walls lined with old photographs. Planes, yes, but also mechanics, their faces grimy but smiling, standing proudly beside aircraft, and in one picture, A little boy in oversized overalls stood beside a man who looked just like Clayton, only older and smiling wide. "My father built his life fixing engines," Clayton said quietly, his voice echoing slightly in the empty space. "Airplanes, cars, anything with a motor. I watched him fix planes that others said were too far gone, breathing life back into machines everyone else had given up on. When he died, I inherited this hangar. I kept the lights off because dreams don't run on electricity. They run on grit. On knowing you can take something broken and make it whole again." Delaney turned slowly, taking it all in. The quiet pride in his voice, the worn but sturdy feel of the place. "Every man you've met," Clayton continued, his gaze sweeping over the photographs, "wanted your empire, your name, your money. I don't care about that. But if you're really offering something real, something more than a headline, then don't expect champagne and fireworks. Expect scraped knuckles, midnight repairs, and meals eaten on toolboxes. Expect a life that isn't polished and perfect, but honest." Delaney smiled slowly, a genuine, heartfelt smile that reached her eyes. "That sounds perfect." For the first time since she had stepped out of the jet, Clayton smiled back. Not because he was charmed or flattered, but because he believed her. Outside, the wind had picked up, whistling through the cracks in the hangar walls, but inside, everything felt still, a quiet pocket of calm in a world that was about to explode with noise. "So," Delaney said, her voice soft, "what happens now?" Clayton leaned against the old workbench, the cool metal a stark contrast to the warmth spreading through him. Now the world finds out Delaney Carter is marrying a grease monkey." A small laugh escaped her lips, a surprisingly light sound in the cavernous hangar. "They'll have a field day. The headlines will be spectacularly creative." "Probably," he agreed, a glint of amusement in his eyes. "But they'll get tired eventually, and then they'll have to deal with the fact that you're still running your empire, and I'm still fixing things." "And what about the fixing?" she asked, gesturing around the empty hangar. "Is this just a memory?" Clayton looked at the photographs again, his expression thoughtful. "It was. But you reminded me why I started. There are still things that need fixing. Things that need a hand that isn't afraid of getting dirty." He turned back to her, his gaze intense. "Your company, Carter Skytech, it's built on innovation, right? Cutting-edge technology. But sometimes the most important innovations aren't in the labs. They're out there, on the ground, in the engines that keep the world moving. There are problems your engineers in their clean rooms can't even see." Delaney listened intently, a spark igniting in her eyes. This wasn't just about a relationship anymore. This was about something bigger. "Are you saying—" "I'm saying," Clayton interrupted, stepping away from the workbench, his voice gaining a quiet passion, "that there's a gap between the brilliant minds designing the future of aviation and the people keeping the current fleet in the air. There are mechanics all over the world working with outdated equipment, facing problems the textbooks don't cover. They need support. They need knowledge. They need someone who understands what it's like to be out there with nothing but a wrench and a prayer." Delaney walked towards him, her bare feet silent on the concrete. "You want to bridge that gap?" "I want to build that bridge," he corrected, his voice firm. "A program, a network. Carter Skytech has the resources, the reach. I have the understanding of what's needed on the ground. We could train mechanics, provide them with the right tools, share knowledge, create a system where the guys in the hangars aren't just fixing planes, they're contributing to the future of aviation." Delaney felt a thrill run through her. This was more than just a crazy proposal, it was a vision, a purpose. She had spent years expanding her father's legacy, making it bigger, more profitable. But this felt like making it better, more meaningful. "A global network of skilled mechanics," she mused, her mind already racing with possibilities. "Leveraging our technology to empower the people on the front lines of aviation maintenance." "Exactly," Clayton said, his eyes shining with enthusiasm. "Think about it, Delaney. We could revolutionize the industry not just from the top down but from the bottom up. make planes safer, more reliable, more accessible. She looked at him, at the man who had walked onto her tarmac in a beat-up truck and offered her a life she never imagined. He wasn't just proposing marriage, he was proposing a partnership, a shared purpose, and it was far more captivating than any romantic gesture she had ever received. It would be a massive undertaking, she said, not as a deterrent, but as a challenge. Nothing worth doing is easy, he replied, a familiar phrase that resonated with her own relentless drive. She extended her hand, not for a handshake, but for his. His calloused fingers closed around hers, a stark but comforting contrast to her own smooth skin. Then let's build a bridge, Clayton. His smile widened, a genuine, unguarded expression of joy. Let's build a future, Delaney. Outside, the first stars were beginning to prick the twilight sky. The quiet hum of the fixed jet was a silent testament to what they could achieve together. The world was about to be rocked by the news of their unlikely union, but for now, in the dusty quiet of an old hangar, two people, from two vastly different worlds, stood hand in hand, ready to build something extraordinary, piece by painstaking piece. The story of the billionaire CEO and the mechanic was just beginning. The silence in the hangar felt pregnant with possibility. Hand in hand, they stood there, not as the CEO and the mechanic, but as two people who had found a shared purpose in the most unexpected of places. The weight of the world outside, the inevitable media storm, the raised eyebrows, the whispers, it all faded into the background, replaced by the quiet hum of shared ambition. We should probably go, Delaney said finally, though she made no move to release his hand. Before someone calls the police thinking I've been kidnapped. Clayton chuckled, a low, rumbling sound. Right. The barefoot billionaire in the abandoned hangar. Not exactly a subtle look. They walked back out, the cool, night air a welcome che. Delaney simply smiled. Chloe, this is Clayton. Clayton, this is Chloe. She's going to be very busy tomorrow. Chloe, ever the professional, swallowed her shock and managed a shaky smile. Right, busy, very busy. The flight back was a blur of whispered conversations, tentative plans, and the surprising comfort of simply being together in the quiet luxury of the jet. They talked about the program, about the logistics, about the resistance they would face. But they also talked about themselves, about their lives, about the unexpected turns that had brought them to this moment. Delaney learned about Clayton's life in the hangars, the smell of fuel, the satisfaction of a job well done. Clayton learned about the relentless pressure of running a global corporation, the loneliness at the top, the constant battle to stay ahead. As the jet descended towards the glittering lights of the city, Delaney looked out the window, a sense of wonder washing over her. Just hours ago, her world had been in chaos, her future uncertain. Now it felt like it was just beginning. The landing was smooth, a testament to the skill of the pilots and perhaps to the mechanic who had ensured their safety. As they stepped out onto the tarmac, the flashing lights of news cameras blinded them for a moment. The media had arrived. Delaney took a deep breath, her hand tightening around Clayton's. He stood tall and steady beside her, his presence a silent anchor in the storm that was about to break. There was no turning back now. They faced the cameras together, a stark visual representation of the two worlds colliding. Delaney, in her elegant but slightly rumpled clothes, and Clayton, still in his work-worn attire. The questions came fast and furious, a barrage of speculation, disbelief, and thinly veiled judgment. Ms. Carter, is it true? Are you engaged to a mechanic? Mr. Carter, what do you say to those who say you're only marrying her for her money? How did you meet? Delaney held her head high, her voice clear and unwavering. Yes, it's true. I'm engaged to Clayton, a man of integrity, skill, and vision. He is not just a mechanic. He is an expert in his field, a man who understands the heart of aviation in a way few others do. She squeezed Clayton's hand again. We met when he saved my life and my jet, and we are not just getting married. We are partnering to build a future for aviation, empowering the people who keep the world flying safely. Clayton stepped forward, facing the cameras with a calm confidence that surprised even Delaney. "I'm not interested in Ms. Carter's money, or her name. I'm interested in her mind, her drive, and her willingness to build something real. We have a plan to invest in the people who are the backbone of this industry, and we're going to make it happen." The reporters were stunned into a brief silence, their prepared questions suddenly obsolete. This wasn't the story they expected. This was something far more intriguing. As they walked away from the flashing lights towards the waiting cars, Delaney leaned her head against Clayton's shoulder for a brief moment. That was intense. "Welcome to my world," he said dryly, a hint of a smile in his voice. She laughed, a genuine, unburdened sound. "Our world now." The journey ahead would be challenging. They would face skepticism, resistance, and the relentless scrutiny of the public eye. But as they drove away from the airport, leaving the chaos behind, Delaney looked at Clayton, at the man who had walked into her life with a wrench and changed everything. She knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her soul, that they could build something not just extraordinary but lasting. The billionaire and the mechanic. Their story was just beginning, and the possibilities, like the open sky, were limitless.